So, Mike, who's stepped in at the last minute because, in case I forgot to say it earlier, Bill Rammel is ill and had to give his apologies. So we've heard two sort of perspectives on change in the content and what business courses and others should teach, perhaps to meet the needs of society and also student expectations. And we've heard about student values, how they want to learn. You've been working on your reform project at London South Bank. Are you going to have to tear any of it up, or how do you react to these comments? How much on the ball do you think you are, or what do you take from this?
I rather hope I'm on the ball, but you could correct me. It's been fascinating to hear both views. I should just explain by way of preface, I've got a rather unusual entree into being a dean of a business school because I've been a legal academic for over 30 years. But actually it's been something of an advantage in two ways. One, it allows me to approach the thing with fresh eyes, if you like, and I don't have to necessarily pretend I know everything because I don't, but it means you question assumptions, that you know, kind of long-held views. But also because there are lessons that you can transfer across from legal education. As one of my other roles, I chair the exam board for intending barristers for the Bar Standards Board. And we've had a big debate about the training of barristers and what form that should take. And there is a relevance for business schools because we began to unpick what the requirements should be. And the more we looked at it, the more we thought, do you know what? The content at undergraduate level really doesn't matter. We took a rather interesting approach to say, well, yeah, the people we put into this profession, how close are they to being able to kill someone if they get it wrong? Okay? And it's an interesting measure because you want your surgeon, okay, to be rigorously trained, have good eyesight and a steady hand, and to get it right. There's a lot riding on that. You rather hope your pilot has been rigorously trained and is not going to crash into the mountains, get the plane, you know, safely on the ground or whatever. Now, I'm not being utterly flippant about this. Clearly, with lawyers, there's loss of liberty and loss of livelihood, whatever. But you understand that the stakes go down a little bit, and it means you can relax a little bit about content. And to cut a long story short, we got to a point where we were thinking, well, actually, what we're looking for is a kind of graduateness, you know, a readiness to go on to a professional stage. Sure, there is now a very narrow core of legal knowledge that we'd want them to understand, but you don't have to have done employment law, you don't have to have done family law, because actually you'll have a bunch of skills that will allow you to develop in that area if you want to. The key to making that work was the amount of continuing professional development that went on once you were in a regulated profession. But it was very interesting to stand back and say, well, actually, we can relax about the content. And I think the significance of that point for business schools is that if you start relaxing about the content, and I know you've got ACCA requirements for accounting and finance, whatever, but if you start to relax about the content of it, you create the room to look at some of the more interesting things that we've been discussing. And you can then engage in a meaningful debate about, well, how do you develop these skills? How do you get this done? Which brings me back to another point about legal education. Because I was very fortunate when I did my law degree a million years ago, that I did it by simulation, which in the 70s was really cutting edge, okay? But we did everything by simulation. We were divided into firms of lawyers, and we were literally told, this is what's happened this week in your case, there's the library, go and find out. There was a very rude expression called FOFO, I think, which I won't decode for you, but that was the method of teaching. Don't ask us, there's a library over there. Go and find out. And they would literally, we'd get to the answer, and then they would change the facts. Say, oh, your client's committed suicide. Get on with it. Now, what does all that mean? It makes you incredibly resourceful. Incredibly resourceful. It makes you kind of quite nimble in your thinking. By the time you graduate, boy, have you got a good practical education about how to do stuff, okay? And increasingly, you know, we're hearing about business schools engaging with this. In my own business school, we're developing a business solutions center, which is a complete rip-off of the legal advice center that I set up. It's the same principle. You get businesses coming in with their problems, staff and students advise them. Students get the opportunity to deal with live casework. There is no substitute for it, but it's scary. But that, I think, creates a number of challenges. And those challenges, I think, touch upon points that both our speakers have made. Turning to Olivier's issue about ethics and sustainability and so on, I think a real challenge there is that quite often academics will circle the wagons if they think someone is telling them what to do. And I absolutely buy into the comment that was made about the loyalty to the discipline. And in fact, you know, you can change my office, you can take away my parking space, but don't mess with my discipline. And don't tell me what should be on my syllabus, because that's academic freedom. And the danger is that a lot of well-meaning colleagues treat a syllabus as a Christmas tree on which they're going to hang things. So, you know, a while back it was, you know, equality and diversity was, you know, the plat du jour, as it were. You had to have that on your syllabus somehow. And if you take the same approach to ethics and sustainability, even if it's a good thing, instinctively some people will say, I'm not going to do it because you're telling me to do it. This kind of intellectual shutters come down. So I do wonder if one of the ways to deal with that, if you can't win people's minds, sorry, if you can't win people's hearts, is to go for their minds and say, actually, this is about pragmatic capitalism. This is about not killing your customer, keeping them alive longer so you can sell them more stuff. And if we begin to think of it like that, we make it a slightly more secular approach, if you like. We're no longer the missionaries proselytizing for a particular view. We just say, this is utterly pragmatic, okay? And you know, if you run a more ethical business, actually you'll attract more investment, it'll be more cost effective, you'll have a fan base rather than customers. That in itself is more sustainable, and so on and so on. And it's that kind of thinking, I think, that we've got to bring in to our teaching and not make it an add-on and nice to have, but make it utterly pervasive in the way that we teach in business schools. A second challenge that comes out of that discussion, if you like, going back to learning by doing, is the tension between that and the continuing massification of higher education. Because whilst I refer to a golden era of learning by doing and teaching by simulation, how many students were there on my degree when I joined? There were 23 of us. I can remember the names of 11 staff, okay? Now, you know, do the maths. It was a different world in terms of the unit of resource. So there's a real challenge there in trying to have cost-effective, personalised education that involves a degree of learning by doing. And I think the work goes on in trying to square that circle. I think we've got a challenge around staffing in business schools. This is a bold generalisation which won't apply everywhere, but I think there is a continuing tension in terms of what we look for when we recruit staff and what we then ask them to do once they've arrived. And I think the area where that is most apparent is where we talk about enterprise in business schools. How many staff are actually appointed because they really are enterprising? It's a rhetorical question. I don't know the answer. Do you know why I'm asking the question? Because the traditional academic career is going to be based in an awful lot of universities now around research. And I'm just beginning to wonder, this is a heresy, I know, but I'm just beginning to wonder about the value of the ref for some business schools, right? Just throw it out there about what the value of some of the research is. How much of it is actually picked up by industry? And how much of it is very inward-looking to get the next promotion to the next level of the academic career? And where does that leave the staff who are not research active? I think one of the tricks that a lot of business schools are missing is really valuing industry experience and allowing a proper degree of interchange between an academic career and an industry career. There's an awful lot of things that militate against that, and as a result, I think staff are in a poorer situation because they're less mobile in terms of their jobs. Some of them end up maybe unemployable, and students suffer because they don't necessarily get enough fresh thinking coming into the classroom. Two more, if I may, very briefly.
Very briefly. Very briefly.
The tension between training and higher education. That's been a little subtext that's run through some of the discussions we've heard today. A lot of what goes on in business schools, I think, is training. And I think there is a tension about dressing it up as higher education sometimes. maybe we need to be more honest that this is actually training and this represents higher education. Otherwise, there's a little bit of confusion between the two. And finally, to pick up on Sarah's point about value for money, and I want to express this fairly graphically. Yes, I think students are customers in the broad sense. There's no doubt about that. It is a huge purchase, okay? And I do wonder what the impact will be over the next couple of years as older siblings open an envelope and show it to the younger siblings and say, that's how much I now owe, okay? It's gone up to £48,000 and rising. I haven't got a clue how I'm going to pay this off. Now, either we end up with a culture where the generation that's coming through say, 48,000, I don't give a damn. I'm not paying it back. In which case you have a public purse problem, okay? Or you have a younger generation saying, my goodness me, I never realized the debt would look like that. I'm going to have a bit of a rethink. Now, that's not just a challenge for business schools, but it's one we absolutely have to be aware of. And it comes back to what are we actually offering in terms of value for money. Sorry, Neil, that was too many points.
All right. Questions, contributions from the floor? People are... Okay, there's one in there. Sheffield.
Thank you very much for that intervention. I wanted to go back to the students as customers. And I think in the broad sense, I agree with you that they are customers because they're purchasing, you know, sort of their education. But in another sense, they're not, because obviously they've got to engage with their studies. And how do you reconcile that? And the fact that now we've got some evidence that the more the students see themselves as customers, the less likely they are to perform well in their studies. And I know it's early days and it's small research, but you know there are some indication that this is the case.
I think the problem with the debate about students as customers is it sometimes tends to be rather binary. You know, they either are or they're not. And I think you're right to observe that it's not always like that. I think you have to look at the different ways in which students interact with the university. So if they are effectively buying accommodation from the university, are they customers? I think undoubtedly they are, okay? If they're buying catering in a refectory, are they customers? Yes, they are. And so you can go on and look at the types of interactions that students have with the university. So in terms of the hygiene and front of house factors, I think they definitely are customers. Classes should start when they're supposed to, okay? Staff should turn up and be appropriately qualified and so on and so on. But then you get into a slightly nuanced relationship where they move into being, we sometimes say partners in learning, but that's really a euphemism for saying, actually, you've got to do your bit. And to some extent, I still like the Weight Watchers analogy, which is not a bad one, actually, in the sense that you can say to them, look, we'll give you the tools, we'll give you the opportunity, we'll give you the support, but actually, you need to do it as well. You are investing in this as well. So I do believe students are customers. I don't think that guarantees them an outcome. And you've got to manage the relationship with the student from the beginning to say there are certain aspects of this relationship where you are responsible and you will get back from this what you put in.
Okay, question, comment at the front?
More of a comment rather than the question, if that's okay, but Richard Hewitt from the Spencer Group. Now, I'm a headhunter in higher education, and it just struck me that what you were saying about recruiting people into business schools and how enterprising they are. I recently recruited, relatively recently recruited, a director of a centre for entrepreneurship, and I was asked to find someone who was enterprising. It was more in the sense of enterprising in the way that they would run the centre, how they would raise funds, so the grant capture and consultancy, and have that balance. And obviously, as part of that, I spoke to a lot of people around the country who are in that part of the space. And what I found was really what you described. You had people who could contribute to REF and very certainly fantastic researchers, but in terms of being enterprising, the question was more, where's my core funding coming from? Yes. And how long's that guaranteed for? And if it's not in black and white, then forget it. Or you had those which were doing fantastic consulting work in the real world, but not getting any research done, and their careers therefore were coming into difficulty. And yes, in the end we were able to find someone who had that balance, but really it's a handful of people in the country could really fulfill that mix. And so it's just interesting that you were saying the same, because that's exactly what I found in the market.
Yeah, and
Ray?
sorry.
No, Ray, you want to?
Just coming back to the point about customer-client relationships and so on. Yes, you can. Students can buy accommodation, they can buy catering. They can't buy personal transformation. You know, you can't commodify that.
Co-production.
So I think that does change the game. However, I think a compounding factor is the current quality regimes we have at the moment tend to measure satisfaction. They measure customer satisfaction. So the NSS is a classic example. It's basically asking, are you happy all the time? And as we all know with assessment, assessment is where student anxiety clusters. You know, they're always going to be anxious about that. They're never going to say, yes, I'm 100%, happy about that. In the States, for example, the National Survey of Student Engagement doesn't ask, are you happy? It asks, how do you spend your time? What do you do during the week? How much of this do you do? How many hours of that do you do? That's fabulous data. We now have data on nearly 4 million students in the States. And that's really useful data in terms of indicating what are very effective measures in that sense. So I think, it's not just are they customers, it's why are we continually asking, are they happy as customers? We should be asking, we want them to be happy and satisfied, of course, but we should be asking them other useful things as well. And the NSSE can measure from all that data what they call high impact measures, the things that really do seem to make a difference in very specific areas, like mature Hispanic women or young black men and so on. Different interventions with different groups, different initiatives seem to have effects. We don't have any of that data at all. We just have every year.
Well, that quality data is about to hit with Mrs. May's most recent initiative. Okay, unless there are any other questions or contributions, I'd like to... Oh, there is one at the front.
Hi, Paul Bangle. Just a very quick one on the enterprise, just going back to enterprise, is having worked at several business schools in the area of enterprise, my solution would be, if I was hiring, is to hire part-time staff, not full-time, in enterprise. It allows them to get on with their business. You can do a job share. The biggest problem we have in business schools is when you've got people with PhDs and professors in research, they've never taken any big risk. And when I say big risk, I mean with their own personal money, with their own savings, with their own income, taking out mortgages on their houses in order to start the business. That's some of the things that real entrepreneurs do, not publish papers. So my suggestion is take on part-time staff, but to manage the department, obviously you need somebody on a full-time basis. So that's basically what I would do if I was in the business school now.
Okay. I think you might find quite a lot of people like that operating in the further education sector, but I won't start that war yet. Okay, I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our speakers and contributors for their pieces this afternoon.